The iPhone 16 lineup promised next-level AI and game-changing upgrades. After all, it was built from the ground up for Apple Intelligence, right? But the biggest change to the iPhone experience this year wasn't with Apple Intelligence at all, but instead a major shift hidden in plain sight. So, in this video, I'll share exactly what that shift was, what completely missed the mark for me, and my experience with the iPhone 16 Pro Max after 6 months. The biggest change to the iPhone experience this year wasn't the release of the iPhone 16 lineup. Instead, it was the release of iOS 18. When Apple announced iOS 18, all anybody could talk about was Apple Intelligence, this next level AI integration that was supposed to change the game. And in retrospect, even though it's only been like half a year, it's unfortunate because in the shadows, something much bigger was happening. A complete shift in Apple's brand philosophy. For the first time, Apple began allowing users to shape their own experience without holding their hands. Apple has had the less is more approach and the we know what's best for our customers ideology for the longest time. So much so that they often handicapped their hardware and software in a way that didn't let users customize and make the most out of their products and workflows. I mean, if you looked at anyone's home screen on an iPhone a few years ago, they all looked the same. And this was all because Apple didn't want the users to ruin their own experience. They were very strict on forcing their users to use their products how they intended. Now, look, to some extent, some of that is true. Not everyone is tech savvy, and part of the Apple appeal is that their products are user-friendly for the most part. But there was a big change with the release of iOS 18 that was building up for quite some time prior to its release. First of all, I'm gonna cover some of the negative experiences I had with iOS 18 and the software, but there weren't that many. The worst of them happened at the beginning when I first got the phone, like the screen not responding to finger inputs, which was fixed with the first iOS update, but I still get some random crashes even with iOS 18.3, which is the latest public update to the software as of recording this video. Sometimes I would get sent to a black screen, which forces me to lock and unlock the phone when I was just using an app or, scrolling or something. And it doesn't happen that often, but it's enough for me to remember and notice. The last time I can remember it happening was when I was trying to log into my banking app using a Face ID, and then I received a text at the same time. As the Face ID scan popped up, I tried to click on the text and reply to it, and it just crashed me to the home screen. Now, I'm not sure if this is an issue with the app or a general bug with iOS 18, but it's happened with other apps as well. So one time though, the entire phone just restarted entirely. That's only happened once, and it was with the latest update, iOS 18.3, but I don't know what that was about. And then the one other bug that I found was with calls, FaceTime calls in particular. Sometimes I'd be calling someone or receiving a call and I'd hear the phone ringing, but the display wouldn't show the FaceTime call. I knew it was calling because, like I said, I could hear it, but also the green light at the top in the dynamic island would appear, so I knew my camera was on. Even with these random hiccups, iOS 18 still marks a meaningful shift by finally letting us shape our own experience, starting with something as simple as customizing your control center. You can resize the controls to your liking, and if you've run out of space, just add another page. But I ended up cramming all the controls I use into a single page and simplifying the entire experience. Turns out that one page is enough for all the controls I need. A welcome addition though has been the ability to swap out my lock screen controls, but I've still kept one as my flashlight. But the other one was switched to launch ChatGPT in most of my focus modes, except the fitness focus mode that I use when I'm at the gym to launch Spotify and the fitness app at the gym. But one place where I felt Apple went backwards was with the new Photos app redesign. It was pretty annoying at first, but at least they give us the option to hide sections we don't want to see. I turned off everything except albums and utilities to keep it simple and as close to the original design as possible. But look, under the old Apple mindset, we would have been stuck with this messy layout and been told, embrace the change, embrace the design, or something like that. But in iOS 18, they're letting us decide what works for us and what doesn't. And that control shows up on the home screen too, where you can now tint and resize icons to really make it your own. Honestly, I think most of the tints look awful and they make it harder to tell the difference between apps, but I love being able to resize apps and widgets. But iOS 18 hasn't just been surface level customization. There have been some meaningful upgrades to core apps we use every day, like mail and messages. Many things we've already seen on other platforms, like email categories, but at least they're here now. Messages also got some upgrades like formatting text and scheduling messages ahead of time. Being able to schedule text has been super useful for me since I often work late and sometimes I'll need clarification or something on an edit. And I don't necessarily want to text a client at 2 in the morning, but I also don't want to forget to do it the next day. So I'll just set it when I remember or when I'm working on the edit and then get a response the next day. It's a little thing, but you know, these are the things that make a difference. The password manager app has also been very useful. Before it was deep in the phone settings, but now it's easier to navigate directly on the app and update your passwords as you change them and whatnot. So again, it's a small thing, but these things actually add up to be a big difference. Especially I always forget my passwords. I don't even want to get into that. But there's been a bunch of other updates to iOS 18 too, like support for RCS messaging and emergency satellite messaging, but these have been the most beneficial to my everyday use. One thing I hope they redesign soon is the deep menus when trying to edit text. For example, if I'm jotting down a note in the Notes app, there are options for attaching files, formatting, and now the new writing tools, which I'll touch more on in a sec. But because of this, it would just be easier if the menus page extended to be full screen with all the options made visible instead of having to scroll through it and finding what you're looking for. Overall, iOS 18 feels like a turning point though. Apple is finally giving us meaningful control over our own experience, and it's definitely still a work in progress, but it's just a shame that all of these genuinely useful updates were overshadowed by the hype around Apple Intelligence, features that promise to change everything but are barely usable even now. Even though they're fully out, I just don't find them to be very useful. So let's take a look at what Apple Intelligence promised and what's actually here. Siri's potential has always been huge, but with iOS 18, Apple gave it more of a visual makeover than a functional upgrade. It looks great, and the promises of understanding our habits, context, and screen content sound exciting, but unfortunately, that's about all we got. Promises. The real intelligence just hasn't arrived yet. And right now, Siri's a shiny new car with no engine. Nice to look at, but it's not getting me anywhere beyond basic Google searches and checking the weather. But it will at least prompt you to search with ChatGPT. But honestly, at that point, I find it easier to launch ChatGPT from my lock screen and go straight into its advanced voice mode, instead of asking Siri and then waiting for it to prompt me and then go into the ChatGPT app. It's just, I'd rather just launch it from my home screen or lock screen. So as I was gathering my thoughts for this video, I realized that the majority of the features that Apple announced are already out in terms of Apple Intelligence. So why hasn't my experience in terms of AI changed much from my iPhone 14 Pro, which is what I'm upgrading from? And that's because all of those actual game-changing features that they announced, like in-app actions and personal context, all centered around a smarter Siri with the ability to understand natural language and the data that it collects from you using your phone. But the problem is, Siri still sucks, and its long overdue update has actually been delayed until 2026. And rumors suggest that Apple might have to scrap the update and start from scratch. That's just a rumor, but the way things are going, it isn't good. Notification summaries have actually not been horrible for me, at least. I know many people just find it completely useless. Now, I'm not saying it completely changed the way I use my phone, but for quickly glancing at my screen and deciding which notifications I want to give my attention to, it's been good. It's been cool. I didn't get any of that weird summary stuff from like Apple News because I have those off anyway. It gives me an idea of what my notifications are, but it's just been fine. Other things like Genmojis and the image playground are completely useless to me, and I honestly don't know the last time I used it, but I can see the appeal for some people. One of the genuinely useful features with Apple Intelligence has been photo cleanup for quickly fixing up a photo without having to launch a third-party app like Lightroom. I thought writing tools would be more useful to me for tidying up emails specifically, and I'm not saying that it isn't useful, but the thing is that since Gmail is still a much better mail app in my opinion, I end up using that over Apple's mail app instead. With that said, it's not like you can't use writing tools in the Gmail app, but Google builds similar writing tools into their apps as well, and it's easier to just use them from there. So for a quick email response, the minute you hit reply on the Gmail app, it'll ask you to swipe and generate a reply based on the context of the email. With writing tools, I have to first draft up the email and then highlight it all and then click on writing tools. There are just a lot more steps involved to just get out a simple email. So if I had to give Apple feedback, I'd say 1, fix Siri, of course, but also maybe with the release of iOS 19 or something, rework the menus a little bit more to be more intuitive. Overall, Apple Intelligence promised to be a game changer, but right now it feels more like a work in progress. They've gotten slightly better with each iOS 18 upgrade, but honestly, that's kind of how I feel about the whole phone. Small improvements from last generation across the board, but with one big exception, and that's the cameras. So let's talk about those, because if there's one thing Apple got right this year, it's the camera system. I'll show you how it's made a real difference to my workflow. So like I said, the camera system is easily the best upgrade to the phone, but whether it's worth the upgrade entirely depends on how seriously you take mobile photo and video. Now keep in mind, there are generally some useful features that anyone can use, but the major changes and the major features this year are for a very niche audience. Let's start with the features for a wider audience first. So, photographic styles are essentially really good filters that can change the look and mood of your photos without needing any photography experience. You have moods, which are like very fancy Instagram filters to change the colors and feel of your image. Undertones, on the other hand, focus on changing the skin tones and adjusting them to your liking. Like I said, these are great for people who don't know how to, or maybe just don't want to spend any time editing their photos with a third-party app like Lightroom. If you are someone that's interested in taking your photos to the next level though, check out this video I made on how to do so. But the camera system in general has seen some upgrades from my 14 Pro Max. It's a slightly larger sensor on the main lens, a higher megapixel ultra wide, and the zoom goes from 3 times to 5 times on the telephoto. These are good changes, but alone they aren't enough to justify the upgrade in my opinion. You can be the judge of that for yourself, but the biggest upgrades in the camera for me are in the video department. This phone shoots Apple's ProRes format, which is literally a professional level compression format. You can also shoot that ProRes footage in log, which gives you so much flexibility to color the footage and remove that digital look. The trade-off is that the file sizes are insane. Using Apple's default camera app, a 3-minute and 40-second video shot in Apple ProRes log at 30 FPS is just over 19 gigabytes. The good thing is that you can also use third-party apps like the Blackmagic app to reduce the file size. So if all this sounds like nonsense to you, then you know that the camera alone isn't a good enough reason to upgrade. And there is one more thing with the camera system, and that's the camera control button. And long story short, it's more distracting than it is useful. I turned it off within the camera app because I always accidentally clicked it, but I do love it exclusively for launching the camera app because it frees up my lock screen so I can use the shortcut for another app or just anything else. And I almost forgot that this was a feature, but the iPhone does shoot in 120 FPS at 4K. And it's just, I haven't used it in forever, so because I never really need to shoot that many frames, but it does look good. So overall, the camera upgrades have really changed how I shoot and work. But these improvements wouldn't matter as much without USB-C, which has genuinely streamlined how I move files around and improved my workflow. Not needing to carry multiple cables around is just clutch. By the way, obviously the USB-C port was introduced with the 15 Pro, but I skipped last year's model, so I'm getting the benefits now. Same with the action button, which turned out to be way more useful than I expected. Being able to launch my task app directly from the home screen helped me not get sucked into my phone and just start, muscle memory kicks in and you start opening social media and whatever. So as soon as I got the phone, I set the battery to max out at 90% charge, which is another benefit of iOS 18. They expanded the options from just 80% all the way to 95%. I think you can do like 80, 85, 90, and 95% in terms of max charge. Keep in mind, I'm someone who charges the phone throughout the day because it's just a habit to plug it in whenever I'm sitting at my desk or not using it. So every morning I started at 90% battery, except a few times which for some reason it charged to 100%. That was one of the few bugs I had with iOS 18 that I didn't mention earlier. Maybe iOS 18 has been a little bit more buggy than previous iOS, at least in my experience, but it still hasn't been like a deal breaker for me. But still, the days that I was out and didn't charge, I would easily be at like 30% by the end of the day. But again, I don't game on my phone. I do watch YouTube videos and stuff, but I'm not like watching 2-hour movies and stuff. As for the build quality, it's solid as usual. Apple doesn't usually miss in this department, but the screen is getting a little too big. I mean, it does look good. It looks great. No complaints there. It's plenty bright and everything, but 6.9 inches is pushing it a bit. I do find myself sliding my phone up and down my palm when I'm trying to reach the corners with one-handed use. I probably would have been better off with the standard Pro model, but here we are. And I believe the phone hasn't actually gotten any bigger. It's just the bezels were reduced, so it kind of just feels that way. But overall, has the 16 Pro been worth it? Apple Intelligence didn't quite live up to the hype, but iOS 18's customization and control, along with customizing what my action button does and the ability to swap controls between focus modes, was genuinely refreshing. The cameras, especially the video capabilities, have made the biggest difference for me, streamlining my workflow and letting me shoot at a higher level. For some of these videos, I even use it as a top-down or B-cam, and the USB-C simplified things even more, just transferring files to an SSD that I can then edit on my computer. So combine all of that with the battery life that I rarely even have to think about, and you've got a phone that's pretty refined, but maybe not perfect, maybe not worth the upgrade, but considering everything else that it offers, it's been an upgrade from my iPhone 14 Pro. So for me, yes. But the lack of smarter Siri has been the most disappointing part. But for most people, especially if you already have something like an iPhone 14, if Apple Intelligence doesn't sound beneficial to you or something you're interested in, and you don't take much photo or video, just skip the phone. But yeah, that's it for me. If you enjoyed the video, give me a like and I'll catch you guys on the next one.